Hello, welcome back. I'm Mike, and for today I'm going to introduce myself by call sign like this. I'm Mike, KG4VDK, because today is the day I'm announcing the golf release of arcOS. There's been some fixes, some improvements, and I think it is well worth upgrading. If you're on Foxtrot, come over and try golf. You can go to the website, get the golf ISO there. Here's one change. It's no longer free to download. It's going to ask you to give me $5.99. The reason for that is enough people downloaded the Foxtrot release that I got hit with an unacceptably high AWS bill. So to try to offset the download costs and also to provide myself a little bit more motivation, there's now just a small fee to download the ISO from the arcOS Linux website. However, I highly encourage you, if you and some friends are wanting to get into this, you are welcome to and encouraged to download it one time and then pass that ISO out amongst your friends. Don't give them the download link. That makes me have to pay for that download. But if you just want to hand them the ISO, please feel free to do so. So let's jump into a walkthrough of golf and talk about the things that are new there and how to get all set up. So we'll jump over and we'll get started. Okay, so here we are booted into arcOS Golf. Very similar to Foxtrot. We've got our station setup window. We'll put in call sign, name, city, state, and then here's my grid square. The grid square now, if at the time you run the station setup, so you've already booted into it, you've run it once, and maybe you've moved locations and you run it again. If you've got a GPS fix at the time you run station setup, the grid square will be auto-populated for you, just as a try to help get you through it quicker. And then you'll notice at the bottom we've got QRV Profile, currently none. But that'll be something we can use later when we're saving configurations to assign them to a particular profile. So we've got all our information in, hit OK, and we're ready. We are up. So in golf, there's been a lot of work that's been put in. I'm going to ask you to donate every 10 times you run the station setup. If you find arcOS to be useful, please consider a donation. I'm not going to harp on that. But there's that. In addition to the save scripts that we had in Foxtrot, they've been added to other applications. So like HamRS now, if you have configured HamRS with your call sign, your name, and maybe you've got a few logbooks in there and you want to make sure that they persist through reboots, you can now save HamRS logs. That saves everything about HamRS, how it's configured, and the logbooks that are in it. So if you've gone to do a POTA and you've got logs in there and you don't want to export them just yet, that's fine. Go ahead and hit Save HamRS Logs before you roll out of the park and power off your laptop. Otherwise, you'll lose your logs. But if you use Save HamRS Logs, you'll still have them. For Direwolf, Direwolf can now be saved. If you need to change something to make Direwolf do what you want it to do, you can go into your home directory, hit Control-H. Control-H is how you show hidden files. Go into the config directory and you'll see direwolf.conf. So change whatever you need to change in here to make it work for your particular use case. Save it, and then you can run save direwolf config. Same for RDOP. The only difference being RDOP's configuration is actually in /opt arcOS bin start RDOP. And you're probably not going to need too much at the top of this file, but towards the bottom, this line right here, that's actually what makes RDOP run. So if you need to change that to, again, to cater to the needs that you have, feel free to change it there. and then run the save rdop script, and you'll have that as well. Pat WinLink, Yak, those are the same as they were in Foxtrot. They will save your configurations. They'll just simply ask you which profile do you want it to be a part of. So you can, by default, I'm assuming that you would want to save it to be your default profile. If that's not the case, change it up. Maybe this is what you're going to put in your mobile profile for when you're out and about. Whatever you want to put in there, that's fine. No spaces, underscores, hyphens, those are fine. Just don't put spaces in it. Those will end up living in your QRV directory for your call sign under saved. If you save a profile, it'll show up in a profiles directory, and it'll be just the applications that you have saved configurations for that particular profile. So for instance, for your mobile profile, maybe that means you're going to have a PRS and a PAT configuration that goes along with that. So you save the Yak configuration for your mobile, you save your PAT configuration for mobile. Anything else that doesn't have a configuration saved under the mobile profile will use the default profile if it exists, and if that doesn't exist, it'll just use the base arcOS config. So base arcOS config, default if available, or your profile. So that's how you can use the profiles to set yourself up for many different roles. I used one the other night at the club meeting I was at. Was going to be doing a demonstration with another member, and built out a profile just for that so that it didn't affect my other configurations, and was able to just run that profile for the duration of the meeting and do exactly what I needed to do. I can modify it for later meetings if we're going to do something similar, or I can just delete it. I'm done using it, but it served its purpose. So that's a little bit about QRV profiles. FLDigi, the FL Suite save script, now also looks to see if there is an FLRig configuration that needs to be saved. So if you're somebody that uses FLRig and you've got it set up and then you wonder why it doesn't work when you reboot after you saved your config in Foxtrot, it's because I wasn't testing for an FLRig configuration. So apologies, but I am trying to handle that now. So now if there is an FLRig directory that indicates there's been a configuration done to FLRig, that will get saved along with the FLDigi configs. If you don't have an FLRig configuration, that simply won't save it. There's not one there to save. In FLDigi, this is a new additional feature. I find this useful. If I leave my FLDigi station unattended, and maybe some other members on our local repeater are pinging my station or sending me messages, maybe you're already familiar with the ping function, but in arcOS you have the ability to ping another station. So it's ping followed by the call sign that you want to send a ping to, and if they are up and running, their station will respond to you. That shows up in your FLDigi window, but if you forget to scroll back up through the window to see what all happened while you were gone, maybe you don't notice that somebody pinged you. So now there's actually a notification that'll pop up at the system level. So I have another station here on the desk beside me. I'm going to send a ping from it to this station, and we should get a notification that we've been pinged. So there we see we've got the system notification. There's been a ping sent. Once it disappears from up here, you can click on the notifications down in the bottom panel, and you'll see that you've got a ping was received on this date at this time. So you can have a little reference there that, hey, somebody was trying to get in touch with me, or at least see if my station was up, and that'll be down in the system notifications so it doesn't just get lost into dev null. So that's it for the the configurations, WSJTX and JS8 call, they both still have their own save scripts that work for them. Some folks reported issues in Foxtrot where they had burned the ISO to their USB drive using the Rufus utility, and following all the default settings in Rufus, it actually doesn't just raw write the ISO to the USB drive. It tries to do some magic on its own to make sure that it gets written correctly. So there is also now logic in the persistence setup that will let you know if it failed and give a little hint as to why. But it boils down to this: if you can use a utility that simply writes the ISO to the USB drive, that's what we should use. So if you're in Linux Mint or something similar, the disks utility can be used to do that. You can also just right click on the ISO and do create bootable USB, and that'll do it. The Raspberry Pi Imager is another choice. But if you're going to use Rufus, all of the default settings are fine except for the last option. You're going to want to choose the use DD option. So that would make sure that it works with Rufus. But at least now arcOS will give you a notification that it didn't work and maybe give you a hint as to why. Let's look. Some other things here in the station information section down here. You'll notice this little clock icon next to your GPS position. I am not currently connected to a network, and so what that's indicating is that my current time source is actually the GPS. Because we're not on a network, we don't have a network time server. We're not using NTP. So that clock icon indicates that our time is currently provided by our GPS device, so we know it's good. Once you connect to a network, that'll drop away because NTP will take precedence over the GPS clock. So that'll go away when you connect to a network. The QRV modules now indicate which branch we're on, so golf matches golf, and then once it's had some time, this question mark will change to a check mark to let us know that we're currently up to date. And then the QRV profile line lets us know that we're currently running with no QRV profile. We haven't saved anything, we haven't loaded any QRV profiles. I've added back the boot device and the uptime one during testing with some other things. Knowing what device I was booted from was helpful, so that's made it back in there. It helps me, and it's good information that some of us might need later on if you're trying to do that install it to your internal drive type thing, and we'll talk about that more in a minute as well. And then uptime is back. You'll see the clock icon has gone away now because I'm connected to a network. Uptime is back. I really like knowing how long my system has been up. Sometimes it's just so I can brag about how long I can keep a live system up and running. Sometimes it's just a good reminder that, hey, you might want to give it a reboot. It is a live system, so any changes that you're making are held in memory. So if you keep it up and running for a really, really, really long time, you might notice that your memory usage will start creeping up, and it might be a good idea to go for a reboot. Another thing that's added into the station info down here, you've got your IP address for your network. Something I have found useful, and it's been in arcOS the whole time, but I haven't talked about it much. Screen sharing, desktop sharing. If you go to your menu, and right here in the left-hand part of the panel, enable, disable desktop sharing. Click on that, and you've got, also in the menu, you can go to Remote Viewer. Now, don't try to do this from the same system that you're on, or you'll get caught in screen sharing inception, where you're sharing a screen that's sharing a screen that's sharing a screen that's sharing a screen. But you can use Remote Viewer, and if you notice that says Remote Viewer clients can connect to VNC at this IP address and this port, and the password for those clients is set to the call sign that is currently set up on this machine. So if you want to put in VNC://192.168.0. and my IP currently is 152, and then 5900 for the port, It'll prompt me for the password, which we know is the call sign. And then we'll watch this go into inception mode. But I am sharing that screen. If I was on a different machine, I would just be seeing this screen, which means I can have arcOS up and running in the shack, and I can go run my laptop on the living room couch and actually control everything that's happening on arcOS from over there. So that might be useful for other folks as well. So that's how you use that. But while the VNC server is running to allow people to access your desktop, you'll notice that we have a little computer icon down here next to the IP address to let us know that on the network we are sharing our desktop. If you want to turn that off, click on it again. Desktop sharing is disabled. Easy as that. Let's see. Update modules over here in the left-hand part of the menu. If you notice that there is an update over here for your modules, if it gives you the refresh icon that matches this update modules icon. In Foxtrot, there was an unacceptable bug. I hope it hasn't affected anybody. Nobody else has reported it, but it bit me, and so that's part of why we're moving on to golf. Update modules was not supposed to be deleting any user modules at the time it got run. However, it did. If that has caused you to lose a user module, I am deeply apologetic. That was not the intention. And hopefully it's fixed now. It's been tested, I hope, much more thoroughly. I have certainly tried to test it more thoroughly. It also now, when an update becomes available, the way your QRV directory is set up, the arcOS modules from GitHub live in your call sign directory. So if you have maybe multiple household members or other friends that use your arcOS USB and they have their call sign on there, you could run into a situation where you have run module updates and so you're up to date, but the modules that are packaged in the ISO are not up to date anymore. And when they create their first, they fill out station setup for their first time, they would have gotten the old modules. And in the case where you were off of a network at the time, they won't be able to update to the new modules. So now the update modules script, in addition to updating your modules, also keeps a copy of the new modules locally on your USB so that anyone else that runs through the station setup will also get the newest copy of the modules that are available. Sound settings. Sometimes different machines are set up differently and they have different default volumes on sound cards, or you just want to make sure that your like this computer by default wants to have its volume at 46%. I like having some notifications that I can hear, so I'll bring it up to like 85%, but then that doesn't persist through a reboot. Or you might need to use something like Awesome Mixer, and you can hit F6, choose your sound card. In this case, I'm going to choose the DigiRig, and then F4. Or you might need to change the speaker volume if you need to change your output from the DigiRig, or hit F4 and go to the capture for the microphone. And you might need to move that up or down depending upon whether or not Direwolf is telling you that you've got packets coming in that are too loud or too low, or maybe in WSJTX and FT8 stuff, maybe you're seeing that your audio meter is pegged out, so you can adjust it there. Once you've got it adjusted to what works for you, you can come over to arcOS Tools, Save Sound Config. It'll ask you what profile you want to go to. This is where you could set it up for maybe your sound settings for doing APRS differ from what you used when you're using WSJTX. So you can set it up however you want to name it. I'm not here to tell you how to do that. But if you want to save it just to your default profile, here's something I think is pretty cool about how this one works. Under profiles, now you'll have default, and saves it in the sound directory. And what we have is the ALSA configuration for this particular machine, denoted by this MG009GG5. That's actually the serial number of this machine. When you save your sound profile, it saves it based on the machine serial number. So if you save it on your laptop and then you plug your USB into a desktop computer and you save it there, it knows which machine it's on and will load the correct sound profile for you. So that should help you, but if you need to move between machines. Also in Foxtrot, there was an ADSB community module that was part of the GitHub side of things and not part of the ISO, but that has actually been moved into the ISO now, and so it's here under the SDR section. It comes up, boom, I've got all the stuff that's happening around me right now. So we're up and running with ADSB without having to run any modules. That's just baked right in now. arcOS is designed to facilitate interoperability between operators. If you are using arcOS and you need to share some files with other folks that are nearby and on the same local network, so you go to a club meeting and you've got 5 of you that are running arcOS and somebody's built a cool module and wants to share it with the rest of you. If you're not familiar with this already, it has a really weird name, but it's got some really cool functionality. It's an application called WarpAnator. In WarpAnator, you will be shown any other active WarpAnator file sharing users that are up on your local network. You'll notice that you show up down here as call sign and name. Since all arcOS users are user at arcOS, this is how you can differentiate between who is on the network. So if you are at a club meeting and need to share a module with 4 different people, all you got to do is find their call sign. It'll already have their name next to it. So if you don't even remember their call sign, because that's how I could be sometimes. I might remember your name is Jim, but I don't remember your call sign. Give me a few more times and I'll get there. But call sign and name right there, and you can share a file with them. So this is just my desktop here in the same office. One thing that you do need to be aware of, by default, WarpAnator uses a group name of WarpAnator, which is an unsecure group. It's just a default group, and it'll make sure that WarpAnator can't run for longer than 60 minutes, and it turns off some other features and functions like the ability to use compression to send your files across the network. So by default, arcOS uses the arcOS group in WarpAnator. But if I want to send my desktop off to my left a file, let's say I want to send it my bash history file, I can just drag it here. It pops up on my desktop over here that I have a file I can accept or decline, so I'll accept it. File transfer completed, and then just for grins, let's send one back. Hey, how about a little tease? Here we go. So I get a notification that Mike Fisher, my desktop, would like to send me 8 files. I'll accept them, and I can click this little folder icon here, and it'll show me what I got sent. Looks like I sent myself a Vara module. Wonder if that means anything moving forward. So that's how WarpAnator works. You can share files, even cool files that are just teases for things that are coming in the future. That bash history file that I moved, that was another thing I wanted to talk about. When you open up your terminal, oops, well, I've accidentally clicked update QRV modules, so we'll see how that goes. And it's done. So I know my modules are up to date. Good to know. But you open your terminal. If you hit the up arrow, you'll see that you have the commands that you ran last. I ran also mixer, so it's in my bash history. Previously in Foxtrot, that bash history file was saved at the global level on the arcOS data storage device, which meant no matter which call sign signed in, they all had the same bash history file. I decided that that should probably be limited to per call sign, so that if your buddy signs in and runs a bunch of commands that you don't need to use, don't have any desire to use, you're not looking at them in your history when you try to go back and figure out what it was you were doing last time. So just a little housekeeping thing, bash history should have been assigned by user every single time. So that's now handled. One last thing I wanted to talk about. If you'll notice on my arcOS data drive, I have a copy of the ISO. So I created my USB, I booted it, set up persistent storage, I then powered it off, unplugged the USB, plugged it back into the computer where I had downloaded the ISO, and I have put a copy of the ISO on the USB drive. arcOS is now capable of self-replicating. Once you've got that ISO on there, your buddy can hand you their USB stick that doesn't have arcOS on it, and you can plug it into your machine, right click, make bootable USB, select the drive there, and create the drive. Boom, it clones itself. What you can also do, this is getting into advanced level, so please don't think that I'm trying to tell you you should do this, but several people asked about it, and so I wanted to cater to it as best I could, but there are some caveats, so proceed with caution. Here be dragons. If you want to install arcOS on your internal drive, the first thing that I want to warn you about is once you have installed this ISO to your internal drive, one, that will destroy any data that was on that internal drive. So don't think you're going to dual boot this with Windows or something like that. You burn this to your internal drive, that internal drive had everything on it destroyed, and arcOS is now on it. What it also does, this ISO is designed, it's essentially a CD, a DVD image put onto a USB drive. It has a signature called ISO 9660. That's the format for a CD/DVD drive. When you install it to an internal drive, that signature gets written there. What you'll run into is after installing to the internal drive, you plug a USB drive into it and think you're going to boot from it by hitting like F12, select boot device, and it will attempt to boot from that. The problem is that there is an internal drive that takes priority over an external drive, just in the ordering of how things typically boot. So it'll tell you it's booting from the USB, and then it will boot from the internal drive because it also has that CD/DVD signature on it. So if you install it to your internal drive and then decide that you need to boot from a different USB, you may need to go into your BIOS and disable your internal drive, temporarily at least. Again, like I said, here be dragons. So we'll go ahead and open up the disks application, and I'm going to install this to the internal drive. So I select my internal 128 gig disk. I'm going to come up here to restore disk image. I'll browse to arcOS data, select the ISO, go ahead and write that to the disk. Writing it to an internal disk is much faster. Their read and write throughput is much greater than a USB drive, so it usually doesn't take too long. But once we've got that written to the disk, you can power off, make sure you're set up to boot from your internal disk, and you should be able to boot right up in it. If you decide, I don't want this anymore, the way I've tried to handle that is to gracefully disable arcOS. To do that, you can come to arcOS Tools, down at the very bottom, wipe arcOS install. And what this tells you is that this action will render the arcOS installation on /dev/sdb, which if you look here in the conky window or conky section, it'll tell you that is the device I'm booted from. So this action would render the device I booted from unbootable. The arcOS data partition will be preserved and relabeled as arcOS old. However, please ensure that import files are backed up before proceeding. And then I'm going to ask you to confirm that you have a backup of those files. When you do that, what happens is the ISO 9660 signature here gets removed. The EFI partition gets its signature is removed as well. And then what would be the arcOS data partition will be relabeled as arcOS old so that you can boot from a USB device. And if you forgot to grab anything in that backup I told you you really should do, it'll still be there under arcOS old. So that's the quick walkthrough of the Golf release of arcOS. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out either via GitHub in the discussions. You can leave a comment on this video. I'm not as good as responding to comments on the YouTube as I am on the GitHub, but feel free to reach out however you would like to reach out, and I'll try to answer what I can. All right. Thanks for watching. Go grab a copy of Golf and enjoy it. Go have some fun playing radio. We'll catch you next time and hope to catch you on the air sometime before then. Talk to you later. Bye.